People love to believe that betrayal arrives like thunder, loud enough to rattle dishes, visible enough to warn the neighbors. Mine didn't. Mine arrived by envelope, cream paper, gold foil names spiraled together as if handwriting could make a promise solid. Nicole and Douglas. I stared at the card over my kitchen sink, water still running, the tiny sound of it tapping the metal like a second hand. The return address was my parents' street, the house we grew up in, the one I painted 3 Julys in a row because Nicole said the color never photographed right. My mother's handwriting wasn't on the envelope. Of course it wasn't. She would have called. She believes in voices. Paper is for parking tickets and goodbye notes. Inside the invitation, a square of vellum floated over a schedule. Welcome cocktails, ceremony, family dinner, dancing. There was a QR code in the corner with a tiny heart and the words, "Scan for details." I didn't scan it. Not yet. I stood there and tried to name the emotion in my chest. It wasn't shock. There hadn't been room for shock in our family for a long time. It wasn't anger. Anger is hot, and I felt cold and precise like a nurse setting out instruments. It felt like a bill. Due, itemized and addressed to Sophia. The older sister, the reliable one, the woman who made sure the lights stayed on and the pantry refilled and the tone stayed polite. The one who taught Nicole how to braid her hair and lie convincingly enough to get out of gym. The one who loved a man who loved applause more than people and discovered, one public photo at a time, that applause had moved on to her sister. I set the invitation on the counter and turned off the sink. The kitchen fell quiet. I could hear my upstairs neighbor's dog dream whimpering through the ceiling, and a siren somewhere far enough away to feel like someone else's emergency. Only then did I pick up my phone and scan the QR code. The web page opened to a full-screen photo of Nicole and Douglas on a rocky bluff that never belonged to them. A place everyone from our town used for engagement shoots because the wind always did your hair a favor. Her hand rested on his chest, his chin tilted toward hers. They looked good together in the way unkind couples often do. Symmetrical, like people who belong in a store window. I scrolled. Past the venue map. Past the dress code. Garden formal, no black. Past the registry where I recognized 3 items I'd helped Nicole pick out 2 years ago for her last apartment. Seating. A tidy diagram of round tables populated by names. Table 1, immediate family. Table 2, bride's friends. Table 3, groom's friends. Table 4, work and college. Table 6, special guests. And there I was. Table 6, Sophia Laurent, ex-girlfriend, emotional support. I don't know how long I stared. Long enough for my phone to dim and ask if I was still there. Long enough to feel my heartbeat slow into something frighteningly steady. Emotional support. That was the joke of it. The tidy way to launder a humiliation until it looked like grace. That's what we did in our family. We named wounds nicely. We said busy when we meant avoiding. We said let's keep the peace when we meant Sophia, please swallow this too. I took a breath and laughed once, not because it was funny, but because there was no other sound left to make. Then I put down my phone and made myself a list. I am a woman of lists. If you've never been the one who keeps a household alive, you don't know how lists hold the roof up like beams. My first list that night was small. 1. Do not reply. 2. Do not call mom. 3. Do not cry. The second list was longer. It began with a memory. We grew up in a town where the ocean arrived in every conversation. Salt in the air, rust on the fences, the gulls arguing on the church roof. My father owned a small shop that fixed other people's engines. Outboards, lawnmowers, anything that coughed and could be coaxed back to life with gaskets and patience. My mother taught violin out of our living room. On lesson days, the whole house smelled like resin and lemons. She would tuck her hair behind her ear and start every beginner on Twinkle, Twinkle because she believed dignity should come early to the clumsy. There were 2 daughters. I was first, Sophia. My name sounded like a plan to my parents. They said it like they were invoking a blueprint. 3 years later came Nicole, all soft cheeks and hurricane lungs, and a laugh that made old men at the market turn their heads and open their wallets. From the beginning, the division was as tidy as a teacher's seating chart. Sophia, quiet, useful, makes the phone calls no one wants to make. Nicole, luminous, adored, makes every difficult thing look like a montage. My mother said we balanced each other. My father said someone has to be steady. When I was 11 and Nicole was 8, Mom took an extra load of students to pay for Nicole's dance recital costumes. I learned to make dinner that month. By the time we were teens, I could stretch a sack of potatoes into 4 different meals, and Nicole could charm our principal into moving a deadline by claiming spiritual distress. When bills came stamped urgent, they found my hands. When compliments came carved like fruit, they found hers. I didn't resent it. Not at first. Love makes arithmetic noble. At 17, I got into a state college close enough to drive home on weekends. Nicole cried at my send-off party even though she'd spent the summer practicing a version of independence that involved borrowing my clothes and leaving wine glasses in hidden corners of the house. "Don't forget us," she said. "As if you will," I said, and meant it like a promise. I've kept worse. I studied design because it made sense to my brain. I liked systems. The way the right shape in the right place could make a path that didn't exist before. My professors told me I had a talent for making complicated things disappear. Design, they said, is what you don't see. That's what I became for my family. The structure they didn't have to notice to trust. After graduation, I moved back to the coast and into a small apartment above a barber's shop. I told myself it was temporary. We didn't say out loud that temporary had a way of becoming forever in our house. My father's knees were going, my mother's hands ached at night. Nicole was in cosmetology school and discovering that clients liked you more if you learned to call your own needs overthinking. I picked up a job at a small tech firm that thought apps could fix loneliness. I smiled through brainstorms, wireframed in a code editor that felt like church. I made enough to be generous, and generosity is a scale that tips quickly. When I met Douglas, I was 26, and in that deeply foolish season where competence convinces you you'll be immune to drama. He came in on a Wednesday morning to pitch my boss a logistics partnership, software for a distribution company that was scrappy enough to be interesting and solvent enough to be real. He shook everyone's hand like he'd known us in school. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves for reasons that did not involve heat. When he laughed, he did it as if laughter could be custom fit to whoever stood in front of him. I didn't like him at first. The charm felt expensive. Then in the hallway afterward, he asked me if I liked my coffee burnt or bruised. "One tiny splash of milk." "No sugar," I said. He brought me one the next morning, right temperature, wrong lid, and left a note that said, "You look like someone who refuses lukewarm." I should have thrown it away. Instead, I called him brave in a voice note, and he called me impossible in a reply. And 3 weeks later, we were in that sweet, dangerous stage where every dinner felt like a secret and every plan seemed to agree with us. He met my family at Christmas. My mother declared him polite but alive, which is how she praises men who don't sleep in church. My father offered him an old wrench as if marriage proposals were still made in barter. Nicole, she adored him. She would have adored a raccoon if it quoted Rilke at a barbecue, but Douglas made it easy. He sparked. His compliments landed like confetti and yet always felt hand-cut. He called her kid, which she loved, and trouble, which she loved more. She touched his sleeve when she laughed. He didn't move his arm away. That winter, after we left my parents' house, I said, "She's a lot." He said, "You're secure." I said, "That's not the same thing." He kissed me the way pretty men do when they want the conversation to end. The scramble years began. My father's shop needed a roof. I negotiated with a contractor and learned to speak in numbers that used commas. My mother's wrists flared. I drove her to occupational therapy and memorized parking lot cracks. Nicole moved into an apartment with a roommate who introduced her to a world where everything is content. She started calling fish tacos a brand. She asked me to photograph her with windows and coffee in ways that felt like apologies for minutes she did not own. Douglas and I settled into an us that wasn't bliss but felt like arable land. He liked plans. I liked lists. We talked about a future within the temperate limits of our town. Maybe a small place closer to the harbor. Maybe a dog. Maybe a long table where we fed people on Sundays. He kept a toothbrush at my place and never paid half the rent, but did the dishes without being asked. He told me he liked the way I said later without making it sound like no. We lasted 3 years like that, mostly good, a little narrow, just ours. Then the weather shifted and everyone insisted it was still summer. It started with Nicole asking for help for a few months when her roommate fell in love with Wyoming and the idea of owning goats. Nicole moved into my place with 3 suitcases and a candle that insisted it smelled like something called morning. She filled the bathroom with hair care brands that came in pink letters. She stayed out later than my fear and learned to leave by noon. Douglas didn't mind. Of course he didn't mind. He liked being watched. He liked being the subject of sentences. They started working on something together before I realized there was a together at all. He had a community partnership sidearm in his company, and Nicole had followers. He proposed collaborations. She proposed reels. I told myself it was fine. Work is work, and if I've learned anything about conflict, it's that the easiest way to survive is to call a thing practical. There were small moments. A joke he told her first. A jacket he lent her that never found its way back to our hallway. A day he and I were supposed to go to the lake, and he texted, "Something came up, rain check." And later I saw Nicole post a boomerang of 2 coffee cups clinking on a patio with Douglas's wrist in the frame. I said nothing. I intended to speak. Then my mother needed help completing a grant for a community arts program, and my father's tax preparer retired, and the refrigerator made a sound like grievance and needed a new motor, and the roof wanted to discuss itself again. By the time I looked up, the plane had taken off. The first visible sign was a photo on Nicole's feed. Fairy lights, thin stems of champagne, Douglas's hand on the small of her back in that intimate, anonymous way that never looks like a crime to anyone who isn't the victim. The caption, "Found my person." I read it in the parking lot of our grocery store with a bag of onions sweating on my thigh. I scrolled the comments. "You two, perfect." Meant to be. My mother wrote 3 hearts. My father wrote a thumbs up because he is a man who believes in participation. The universe did not pause. No alarm sounded. A woman with a braid walked past my car, pushing a cart that squeaked on one wheel, and asked a child whether they had put the cereal back like they promised. I called Nicole. She didn't pick up. I called Douglas. He did. "Soph," he said. In the background, someone laughed like a firecracker. "I meant to speak to you. This is messy. I didn't plan." "You used my house," I said, because that was the sentence I could say without crying. "You used my life." "I never meant," he started. "When?" I asked. "When didn't you mean?" He inhaled. "We didn't plan to fall." "People don't fall," I said. "They climb." He was quiet. Then, "You're strong." It's what men say when they want to excuse their appetite. We hung up. I drove home. I packed his things in 2 hours and did not leave a note. He texted the next morning, "I never wanted to hurt you. You deserve better than anger. There are texts that deserve to be fined." My mother called 2 days later and said, "Don't make it a war. Families survive worse. Your sisters." That's when I learned that sister can be a job title. I moved apartments, small place, top floor, good light, nobody's toothbrush in the cup but mine. I blocked them. I made lemon pasta 3 nights in a row because buying new groceries felt like admitting that joy would require shopping. I did not cry so much as solidify. Healing took the shape of routines. Work, run, cook, return library books on time. Friends insisted on wine and I sat with them but drank seltzer because alcohol made my logic sloppy and I could not afford that. I woke early because quiet felt like interest paid. Then life got practical again. The email that started everything looked like spam. Alert. Transaction from linked account. I almost deleted it. Then I saw the amount. $2,300. The source, a savings account Douglas and I had opened the year he promised we'd get serious about down payment math. I thought I'd closed it. I had not. The money moved to an entity with a name I recognized through Rage, Harbor and Vale Investments, LLC. Curiosity is a dangerous gift, but mine has always paid rent. I traced the company, then the filings, then the partner list. Douglas Pierce, Nicole Laurent. Description: property acquisition and development for residential flips on the mid-coast. I scrolled, and then I found it. A letter of intent, unsigned but not unclear, for a purchase of my parents' home, below market, with temporary relocation support, with an outline of light renovation and value add, and a plan to list within 6 months. Something in me went very quiet, the way a kitchen sounds when you pull the plug on an old fridge. The relief is immediate. The emptiness echoes. I drove to my parents' house the next morning and found them around the dining table with papers like napkins. Nicole wore a sweater the color of an apology. Douglas smiled like a publicist. My parents looked simultaneously proud and relieved, which is the expression aging people make when young people present solutions. "We're just exploring," my mother said before I asked a question. "The stairs are getting hard for your father? Maybe an apartment near the market?" "We found a great option," Douglas added. "We'd handle everything." "Everything?" I asked. "Even honesty?" He blinked. Nicole crossed her arms in what she believes is a grown woman's posture. I said 3 sentences. "You used my account. You used their trust. Don't call this help." My father frowned. "No one's doing anything wrong, Sophie." "The paperwork says otherwise," I said, and left before I broke into pieces sharp enough to cut my parents. In the car, I breathed slow, counted to 10, then 30. Then the years I had been the person who turned off lights behind everyone else. If I'd been a different woman, perhaps I would have screamed. If I'd been a more dramatic one, I might have thrown something breakable. Instead, I went home, made tea, sat at my desk, and opened my laptop. This is how I design. I start with the story people tell themselves. Then, I chart the steps they will take even when they swear they won't. I made 3 new lists that night. List A, what they believe. 1, Sophia won't make trouble. 2, family will always choose a narrative over a fact. 3, paper beats memory. List B, what I know. 1, digital trail beats paper. 2, heaven help the liar who forgets to revoke access. 3, weddings require QR codes. List C, what I will do. 1, collect. 2, preserve. 3, mirror. 4, replace. Collect, I logged into an old shared drive Douglas had forgotten he'd shared with me and found invoices, draft contracts, emails. I downloaded copies and saved them to 3 places: cloud, physical again. I printed key items and set them in a manila folder labeled for after. Preserve, I took screenshots with metadata that would make any amateur defense crumble. I exported email threads to PDFs with headers. I saved voice notes to .wav format and transcribed them, highlighting the parts where he said, "Nicole's parents will do whatever she says if we make it sound like care." Mirror, I went to the wedding site linked in the invitation and cataloged everything. Colors, fonts, page flow, the way the menu opened and the music looped like a narcotic. I built a duplicate on a domain that differed by 1 letter. douglasandnicole.com versus douglasandnicole.com. I paid extra to make load times instant. I copied their hero image, public, theirs, and embedded it at the top. I built a gallery that matched theirs page for page. Replace, I created redirects. They had printed QR codes for menus, for seating charts, for a guest book wall that sent your selfie to their page. I set up my clone to accept those scans just as easily, depending on how the link was shortened. It doesn't take a hack. It takes carelessness and a family's belief that the quiet daughter is a wallflower, not a wall. It took me 6 weeks. Not because it was technically hard, but because I did it between a life, work, grocery lists, checking on my mother's wrists and my father's patience. I remembered to water my spider plant. I slept. I ate. I planned the weather. Meanwhile, the town prepared to applaud. People love a wedding. It feels like permission to forget the math of the others they've applauded into ruin. My mother called to ask whether I would stand during the blessing. You don't have to give a toast, she said, as if that were generosity. Just be there. Of course, I said. I meant it. I would be there the way a surgeon is there. Calm, gloved, and finished planning. 2 weeks before the ceremony, I did something else. Not cruel, smart. Through the filings I'd copied, I found the house Nicole and Douglas planned to buy after they flipped my parents. A renovated Victorian 2 streets away with a porch that promised nothing and a roof line that required someone patient. The seller was weary. Their financing had snagged on something unromantic. I created an LLC with a name that would not alarm a person who reads the news. I wired a deposit from savings I had planned for a different life. The seller accepted within a day because money with manners arrives like relief. The deed came to me in a manila envelope I opened alone at my little kitchen table. I put my palm on the paper and did not cry. There are victories that feel like land returning to a map that forgot you. I didn't tell anyone. Of course I didn't. What fool announces the foundation before the walls rise? The invitation sat on my counter until the day it didn't. I taped it inside a clean notebook. I wrote the date across from it in block letters like a promise. On the morning of the wedding, I woke before my alarm. The light over the city was the color of unbleached linen. I showered, steamed the dress I'd bought precisely because no one would remember it later, and curled my hair in waves my sister would have called understated if we're being generous. I chose lipstick that did not announce itself. I packed a small bag, wallet, keys, phone, 1 flash drive because I believe in redundancy, 1 tissue because I believe in a kind of grief that does not sob. I ate toast, I washed my plate, I made my bed. I looked in the mirror and thought, you look like someone who writes lists and keeps them. Then I smiled at myself for the first time in months. The church was the one where they baptized us, where I once played Mary in a pageant because Nicole didn't like the costume. The front lawn was full of folding chairs and intentional whimsy, chalkboard signs that said, pick a seat, not a side, and centerpieces in mason jars tied with ribbon that did not exist in nature. People I hadn't seen since high school looked at me and tried to place the name. I made it easy for them. I nodded and said, Sophia. They tilted their heads and did the math where they stood. My mother looked beautiful. Women like my mother always do at events like this, a little luminous, a little terrified. She held my hand as if it were something breakable. Thank you, she whispered, for coming. I said I would. I said. She blinked down at my fingers. Her hands were stiff. I wanted you to be happy. I am, I lied, and meant it only in the way that resolved can feel like joy if you hold it correctly. We took our places. The music began. The bridal party entered with the kind of choreographed authenticity people hire consultants to teach them. Then, Nicole started down the aisle on my father's arm, and the town did what it had been longing to do since she was 8 and won the 2nd grade spelling bee by guessing. It gasped. She is beautiful. I don't mind admitting it. It is easier to fight a fact when you name it first. My father looked 10 years younger and 20 more tired. He lifted her hand like a prize. At the end of the aisle, Douglas waited with that steady half smile he uses when he wants to look like a solution. They said vows. Honest ones, probably, in the way liars can be honest in the moment. He promised a home. She promised a horizon. They exchanged rings. People dabbed their eyes with linen. The pastor said the words. There are 100 moments at a wedding where a sister could stand and shout. I didn't pick any of them. I waited until the reception. Because revenge is logistics. Because truth is an event, not a sentence. Because it is easiest to show someone who they are when they are trying very hard to be someone else. The venue was a community hall near the harbor strung with lights that made everyone look younger. The bar served wine that tasted like fruit remembered in a story. Each table had a little card with a QR code printed in curling font. Share your wishes with the happy couple. Leave a note, a photo, a memory. There were also QR codes on the menus, on the escort cards, on the chalkboard near the photo booth. They had built a tiny ecosystem of digital entryways and assumed they owned all the doors. They did not. I watched my table fill. Two cousins, one neighbor who had borrowed our mower for a decade, a woman who taught us algebra and now taught other people's children to pretend to love algebra. They chatted and scanned and laughed and made little oh noises that mean a page loaded just right. I folded my napkin. I lifted my glass. I waited. Phones began to blink around the room like a constellation. Heads tilted. Whispers started at the polite volume people use when they need to hear themselves lie. Someone at a nearby table frowned. Is this part of the site? Someone else. It looks like a third voice. Are those emails? I didn't look at Nicole yet. I didn't look at Douglas. I watched the crowd instead, because I wanted to see truth arrive in waves. It did. It always does. At the head table, my mother's face closed like a window in a sudden rain. My father lifted his phone and squinted, then lowered it and looked at me. And that was the one moment in this entire sequence where my chest hurt in a way that asked to become a sob. I held his gaze as gently as I could and shook my head once. Not no, not yes, something like I am sorry you have to see this like this. But I am not sorry that you see. Nicole finally turned. Her mouth opened in that perfect "oh" she used as a teenager when she wanted to look innocent and surprised by the mess she'd made. Douglas's jaw shifted. He put his hand on the table where everyone could see his steadiness. I did not stand. I did not speak. I didn't need to. The screens did it for me. Emails, texts, the unsigned letter of intent with the address of the only home my parents have ever owned typed neatly at the top. A sound file of Douglas explaining temporary relocation to a friend in a tone that made compassion sound like a tax credit. The mirror site looked exactly like theirs until you tried to interact with it, and then it behaved like a conscience. Polite, precise, impossible to argue with if you had ever been honest even once. Someone tried to reload. The site loaded faster. Someone tried to switch to the original link. The QR codes near the bar had already been replaced by copies that included a small one-letter difference no one noticed until they had no appetite for noticing. A murmur moved through the hall that sounded briefly like wind in the aspen trees behind our house when we were children, and the weather changed hard. I sat still. I breathed. I did not smile. Not yet. Across the room, Nicole stood abruptly and her chair scraped the floor like a remark. She looked at me then, fully, and in that look lived every history we had, every bath I ran for her as a child, every paper I edited, every lie I allowed to become a story because I did not want to watch her learn the price of gravity. She walked toward me in a straight line like a person walking into rain and deciding to call it cleansing. Sophia, she said, not softly. What did you do? What I had done was the list. Collect, preserve, mirror, replace. What I said was, I stopped letting you write my part of the story. Her eyes flashed. You're ruining my wedding. I shook my head. I'm revealing it. Douglas arrived beside her with a smile that asked the room to go back to sleep. This is a misunderstanding. Someone is using your own words, I said, which is an underappreciated art. He breathed through his nose, the way men do when they want to look like they have a plan. Turn it off, he said. You don't get to tell me what to, Nicole began. He didn't look at her. That was the first honest thing he'd done all day. The room had gone quiet except for the squeal of a child near the photo booth and the small, shuddering breath of my mother 3 tables away. I rose then, finally, because the doctor should stand when the diagnosis arrives. There's an envelope in the church office, I said, pitching my voice for the room, not the two of them. It contains printed copies from my parents and the board of the community center, because this venue is leased from them and they deserve to know whether they are hosting a celebration or a transaction. That envelope is not for public consumption. My mother is not a spectacle. People shifted. Someone whispered, "Good." I looked at Nicole. The face I'd loved since she was a purple thing in a hospital blanket made a shape I didn't know. "You could have told me," I said quietly. "You could have told the truth." She swallowed hard. "You would have said no." "That's what honesty risks," I said. "That's what adulthood is." Douglas took a small step closer. His voice dropped into the register he used when selling something large to someone small. "You can be generous about this, Soph." "Sophia," I said, "because sometimes the first boundary is your own name." He looked like a man who had just been told his password expired. "You will find," I continued, "that even after this, you still have somewhere to sleep tonight." I let the line sit a heartbeat and then put the key into it. "Just not where you think." Nicole frowned, confused. "What does that mean?" "Ask your realtor," I said. "Or your lender, or your email." I sat. I picked up my water. I took a sip. The music did not start again. Weddings break in silence and then sing at funerals. My mother stood finally and placed one hand flat on the table as if testing whether the wood would still hold. She looked at me with our shared brown eyes and said, "Can we go home now?" "Yes," I said, and I meant a very old thing by that word. We left through the side door because sometimes dignity is an exit strategy. In the parking lot, gulls argued about nothing important, and the wind smelled like the hour before rain. My father closed his car door carefully, like sound could bruise. He started the engine and turned down the radio before it could think. "Sophia," he said, and then stopped, because there are sentences a man who believes in tools does not have the vocabulary for. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry you had to see it this way." He shook his head. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." We drove home in a line of 3 cars that felt like a procession for a particular kind of death. The story where I always made myself small in service of a family that preferred me that way. When we reached the house, I stood on the front walkway and looked up at the porch I had painted and repainted until it forgot how to be old. My mother touched the railing. My father rubbed his hands as if warmth still lived in friction. They went inside. I stayed a moment longer. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number that did not need to introduce itself. "You won't get away with this." I stared at the words until they lost meaning and became shapes. Then I typed slowly. "That's the thing about truth, Douglas. It doesn't have to get away." I put my phone in my pocket, breathed in, breathed out, and followed my parents through a door that had always opened for me, even when I had forgotten that I was allowed to use my own key. Inside, the house smelled like lemon oil and dust. My mother sat on the edge of the couch like a guest. My father went to the kitchen and made tea because he is a man whose faith lives in rituals. I took the manila folder from my bag and placed it on the coffee table. The copies were inside. I spoke quietly the way you speak to people leaving anesthesia. "We'll talk through the details tomorrow," I said. "Tonight, let's just be in the same house." My mother nodded. Her eyes were wet but clear. "Will there be police?" she asked, as if that were the last train and we had missed it. "No," I said. "No police, just boundaries." She let out a breath and it sounded like a decade. "Good." We drank tea. We did not speak of Nicole. We did not speak at all after a while. The house hummed the way old houses do when they decide to forgive you for threatening to leave. When I went upstairs to my old room, I paused in the doorway and looked at the wall where a teenage version of me had taped up postcards of cities I planned to see one day. Lisbon, Kyoto, Reykjavik. The tape had yellowed, but the corners still clung. I touched one. "Soon," I told it in a whisper that felt brave. Back in my small apartment later, I took off my dress, washed my face, and stood at the window long enough for the streetlights to rearrange themselves. Then I opened my laptop, checked the confirmations I had sent to my own email hours earlier, and opened a folder labeled Harbor Lane Holdings. The deed to the Victorian 2 streets over from my parents' house lay at the top of the pile like a new spine. I placed my palm over it again, not for magic, just for grounding. Sometimes revenge is a headline. Sometimes it is a transfer of title. I closed the folder and made one last list before bed. 1. Sleep. 2. Breakfast with mom and dad. 3. Call the locksmith for them. New deadbolt. 4. Send the seller's agent a thank you note. 5. Choose the day. The day for what? For the part of truth that is not spectacle. For the quiet appointment after public revelation. For keys. Because there is only one way to end a story like ours, where beauty made bad investments and kindness became credit, but it is not with shouting. It is with a door opening for the right person. I turned off the light. The dark did not frighten me. It felt like an honest room after the guests have gone. Messy, sure, but finally mine to clean in peace. Tomorrow, I would start the part that looked cruel to people who had never paid a bill that did not belong to them. Tomorrow, I would teach my sister the oldest skill no one taught her: how to live where you don't own the deed, and how to grow up when the person who patted your world stops throwing themselves under your fall. I slept. I dreamed of a porch I had not yet stepped onto with keys that had my name on the ring. Not Nicole's. Not his. Mine. And morning came the way mornings always do, as if they are inevitable even when you are not sure you survived the night. The morning after the wedding felt like a hangover without the wine. I woke in my parents' guest room, sunlight cutting a thin stripe across the quilt, dust motes drifting like they were lost too. The house was quiet in that heavy, stunned way that happens after a storm. Nothing broken, but nothing right either. Downstairs, I could hear my father moving carefully, the way he always did when he was trying not to wake anyone. The kettle clicked on, metal against metal. My mother's voice came next, low, saying something I couldn't catch. I lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, wondering if they'd slept at all. The last thing I remembered from the night before was the drive home. No radio, no words, just my mother's hand twisting the strap of her purse until the leather creaked. I had thought exposure would feel satisfying. Righteous even, it didn't. It felt like cleaning a wound that had needed air for years. Necessary, but raw. When I finally went downstairs, my mother was at the sink, turning a mug in her hands like it was something breakable. She didn't look up right away. "Tea?" she asked. "Sure." My father was sitting at the table with the newspaper open but unread, his glasses low on his nose. He looked older this morning, like the truth had added a few years overnight. He said, "They called." I didn't ask who. There was only one they that mattered. "They can't get into the venue," he said. Police came because people were still there, arguing. Some guest uploaded everything before they shut it down. I poured tea into my cup and nodded. The clink of porcelain was too loud. Mom finally looked at me. Her eyes were red but steady. "Did you know it would spread like that?" "I knew it could," I said. I tried to make it just visible enough for them to see themselves. She nodded slowly. Well, they saw. She sat down, folded her hands. For a long moment, we just listened to the kettle cooling, the tick of the wall clock. Then she whispered, "You did what I should have done years ago." That nearly broke me. What's that? Stop pretending she'll change if we keep forgiving her. No one cried. We were past tears. The body can't manufacture them forever. We just sat. 3 people who had finally run out of illusions, drinking tea that tasted like smoke. By noon, the phone stopped ringing. By evening, the newsfeed was full of fragments. Screenshots, whispers, sympathy from strangers who didn't know any of us but loved a scandal. I didn't read the comments. People don't want truth. They want entertainment. That night, I stayed in my old room. The wallpaper still had faint outlines from where my teenage posters once hung. I lay awake, thinking of Nicole and Douglas somewhere. Probably at a hotel, probably blaming each other. I wondered if she'd cried yet, if he'd told her it was all my fault. I wondered if she believed him. By morning, my mother had gone to teach her first student since the wedding, a small girl with pigtails who played out of tune but with heart. My father was in the garage fixing a motor he'd been avoiding. Life, despite everything, insisted on continuing. I checked my email, 2 new messages. One from an unknown address titled, "You think this makes you better?" I didn't open it. The second was from the real estate agent handling the Victorian. Subject: Congratulations. Closing confirmed. I exhaled. There it was, the quiet click of inevitability. The house was officially mine. That afternoon, I drove across town. The air smelled like salt in late summer. The Victorian sat 2 streets over from my parents' place, white trim, wide porch, a for sale sign half hidden in weeds. The seller's car was gone. The key box hung open. I let myself in. It was empty, echoing, full of that faint drywall smell of recent renovation. Dust patterns on the floor marked where furniture had been staged for photos. I walked room to room, fingertips trailing along the banister. In the kitchen, sunlight came through tall windows, catching motes of dust in a golden column. There was still a folder on the counter. Harbor and Vale Investments. Renovation plan. I flipped it open. Blueprints. Measurements. Her handwriting on the corner. Master bath. Marble. With a heart. I laughed softly, not cruelly, just the kind of laugh that comes when you see how much pretending costs. Then I closed the folder and left it there. A relic. I stood in the living room, looked out through the wide windows to the street. For a long time, I just listened. To nothing. No yelling, no demands. Just wind in the trees and the creak of a floor learning to hold new weight. The realtor had left the paperwork neatly on the mantel. My name on every page. Owner, Sophia Laurent. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like gravity finally stopped playing favorites. That evening, I made dinner for my parents. Simple fish and potatoes. We ate without ceremony. Halfway through, my father said, "She'll come." I didn't ask who. She always does when the world stops clapping. He was right. It was raining when she did. 2 nights later, headlights washed over the driveway, a door slammed. I saw her silhouette through the curtains, umbrella crooked, hair damp, a figure I'd once carried across puddles when she was too scared to jump. I opened the door before she could knock. Nicole looked like a ghost of herself. No lipstick, no shimmer, just swollen eyes and a trembling jaw. She was wearing one of Douglas's hoodies. I could smell his cologne, expensive and meaningless now. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. "You already know the way." She hesitated, then slipped past me, dripping onto the floor. The air between us felt full of static. "You win," she said finally. "It wasn't a game." "Sure looked like one." "No," I said. "That's what you two made it. I just stopped playing." She laughed once, sharp, defensive. "Do you have any idea what you've done? He's gone, Soph. He left. Packed up, took the accounts, disappeared. Everyone's talking. I can't even go online without seeing my name." I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Good. Maybe you'll finally hear yourself think." She started pacing. "You destroyed everything. My reputation, my business." "Your business was built on fraud and charm," I said quietly. "You were selling houses that didn't belong to you, promising futures you couldn't afford." "I didn't know," she said. "Yes, you did. You just didn't ask." That stopped her. The rain hit harder against the windows, the sound filling the silence. She didn't know how to answer. After a long minute, she said, "I loved him, you know." "I did too," I said. "And look how well that turned out." She sank onto the couch, hands shaking. "What happens now?" "Now?" I said. "Now you get to start over. Without him. Without me cleaning up after you." She looked up, eyes glassy. "You're not even angry." "Oh, I'm angry," I said. "But anger's cheap. I'm expensive now." She laughed again, but it broke halfway. "Mom and Dad hate me." "They don't," I said. They're just tired. Same as me. We sat there for a while, the rain softening outside. She stared at her hands. I don't have anywhere to go, she whispered. Yes, you do. Her head snapped up. Where? I reached into my bag and tossed her a small envelope. She opened it. Inside was a check and an address. The Victorian, I said. You wanted it so badly. It's empty now. Her face went white. You bought it. I nodded. It needs cleaning, a little repair. You can stay there for a while if you pay rent. Fair market value. She blinked, confusion overtaking pride. You're renting it to me? I'm giving you a chance to grow up. That's cruel. No, I said softly. It's kind. She stood, shaking. You really think this makes you better? No, I said. Just freer. Nicole looked around the room like it was foreign territory. I don't even know who you are anymore. That's because I finally stopped being who you needed. She left without another word, slamming the door hard enough to make the frames rattle. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Then I picked up the mug she'd left on the table, still half full, and poured it into the sink. The next morning, my mother found me on the porch with coffee and a blanket around my shoulders. She handed me the newspaper. The headline had already moved on. That's the mercy of scandal. People forget fast. She came, didn't she? Mom asked. Yeah. Did you fight? No. Good. She sat beside me. You always were the quiet one. Not quiet, I said. Just waiting for the right volume. She smiled faintly. Will you forgive her? I thought about that. Maybe, when she starts forgiving herself. Mom nodded like she understood. You did right? Maybe, I said. But right doesn't always feel good. It's not supposed to. We sat there until the coffee went cold, watching clouds roll over the ocean. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, that's too bright, but balance. That afternoon, I drove to the Victorian again. The rain had cleared. The yard smelled of wet earth. A moving van was already there, Nicole's handwriting scrawled on the boxes. She looked up from the porch steps when I pulled in, uncertain whether to wave. I nodded instead, small, neutral. When she walked toward me, she stopped halfway. I'll pay, she said quietly. Every month. I know you will, I said. It's a nice place. Take care of it. As I turned to leave, she called out, Sophia? Yeah? Why give me this? After everything? I thought about it for a second. Because someone has to start teaching you what ownership feels like. Oh, her mouth opened, closed. No answer. I got in my car and drove away, the sun cutting through the clouds like a truce. Douglas didn't disappear completely. Men like him never do. They linger in inboxes, in rumors, in the polite small talk of people who still think charm is a currency. A week after the wedding, his name appeared on the local news site in a short article titled Business Venture Under Investigation. The piece was bland, factual, the way truth looks when it finally gets paperwork. I read it once, then closed the tab. There was nothing left in that story that belonged to me. My parents' house changed that week in tiny, almost invisible ways. Dad whistled again while he worked in the garage. Mom taught her students without glancing at the phone between lessons. The walls didn't creak as much at night. Maybe they always had, and I just stopped listening for ghosts. I started fixing the little things I'd ignored for years. Repainted the railing, oiled the hinges, replaced the bulb on the porch. Every task felt like reclaiming a syllable of my own name. At dinner one evening, Dad said, I keep thinking about the house. Your sister's. You really bought it? I did. He looked proud for a second, then sad. That's a lot of responsibility. I know, I said. But at least now responsibility answers to me. Mom smiled faintly. You always did like control. I like peace, I said. Control's just how you buy it. They laughed, and for once, it didn't sound like a joke that cost anyone anything. Douglas tried to call once. Unknown number, middle of the night. I knew the rhythm of his silence on the line. I didn't answer. He sent a message instead. You ruined my life. I typed back, you built it on lies. I just turned on the light. He didn't reply. Later, I heard he'd left town, some new start somewhere inland where the ocean couldn't remind him what he lost. I didn't bother confirming it. Some truths don't need receipts. Nicole kept her promise. The rent arrived every month, small envelopes, neat handwriting, always on time. No notes, no apologies, just the quiet evidence of growth. Sometimes I'd drive past the Victorian and see lights on in the windows. The faint outline of her and Leo moving around inside. The house looked lived in now. Real. That was enough. Spring came early that year. The magnolia in my parents' yard bloomed 2 weeks ahead of schedule. White petals scattered like confetti across the lawn. One morning, I found Nicole sitting on the porch steps. No car in sight. She was wearing a denim jacket, hair pulled back, eyes tired but clear. I didn't want to call, she said. Didn't know if you'd answer. You found a better way, I said, sitting beside her. For a while, we just watched the petals fall. She said, Leo starts preschool next month. He asks about you. I think about him too. He likes the new house, calls it the big quiet one. She smiled faintly. Guess he takes after you. I smiled back. Quiet isn't bad. It's just peace with better manners. She nodded, then hesitated. I wanted to say, thank you. For what? For not letting me fall farther. I looked at her. You fell exactly as far as you needed to land on your feet. She swallowed hard. I don't expect you to forgive me. I already did, I said. That night you walked out of the house alive. Forgiveness isn't approval. It's release. Tears gathered, but she didn't let them fall. You always talk like everything's already decided. Maybe it is, I said. Or maybe I just finally believe I get to decide. We sat there until the shadows lengthened. When she left, she didn't hug me. I didn't need her to. Some bonds are quieter than touch. A month later, a letter arrived addressed in Douglas's handwriting. No return address, just the neat, deliberate strokes of a man who still thought presentation mattered. Inside was a single page. Sophia, you could have just told me you were going to destroy me. I might have understood. I hope you're happy. D, I folded it once, twice, then dropped it into the fireplace. The paper curled, blackened, and vanished. Happiness isn't a verdict, I thought. It's a daily negotiation. I moved into the Victorian that summer. Nicole and Leo had found a small apartment closer to town. She wanted to be near her new job at a design shop. When she handed me back the keys, she said, I left the curtains. They fit the windows. Keep them, I said. I'll choose my own light. The first night alone there, I slept on the floor in a sleeping bag. The air smelled of old wood and possibility. The moonlight through the tall windows painted silver stripes across the walls. I didn't dream of the past. I dreamed of rooms filling with laughter I hadn't met yet. Mom and Dad came by the next weekend. Dad walked through the doorway and said, Looks like you finally got yourself a proper house. Mom touched the banister, smiling. It suits you. We sat on the porch, drinking lemonade like we used to after chores when Nicole and I were kids. The ocean shimmered at the end of the street. Dad said, Do you ever miss how it was? No, I said honestly. I miss who I thought we were. Mom squeezed my hand. That's enough. When they left, she turned back at the gate. You know, she said, you didn't just fix what they broke. You fixed us too. I watched them drive away, the sound of the car fading into the hush of evening. The world felt proportionate again. Nicole called once more that autumn. I was sanding the porch railing, radio low, smell of pine dust in the air. I got promoted. she said, almost shyly. First time someone said I earned something. You did, I said. I wanted you to know. I'm proud of you, Nick. There was a pause. We're okay now, right? We're becoming okay, I said. That's better than pretending. After the call, I stood there for a long time, hands resting on the wood, feeling the grain under my palms. It was smooth, clean, ready for a new coat. Winter came early, crisp and clear. The Victorian held warmth better than I expected. Some nights I'd light a fire, sit on the floor with a glass of wine, and listen to the house breathe. On the mantel, next to the deed with my name on it, sat a single photograph from the old days. Mom, Dad, Nicole, me, all squinting in the sun at the beach. I kept it there, not out of nostalgia, but acknowledgement. Proof that love existed once, even if it learned to shapeshift. Outside, the street was quiet, streetlights blinking like distant lighthouses. I opened the window, letting the cold air in. Somewhere far away, a train passed, its whistle soft and steady. I thought about everything that had happened. The invitations, the QR codes, the gasps, the silence after. How revenge had disguised itself as justice and then quietly turned into freedom. I whispered to the empty room. It wasn't revenge. The words hung there, warm against the chill. It was reclamation. I picked up my pen and added one last line to the notebook I'd started months ago, the one where every plan began as a list. 1. Protect what matters. 2. Tell the truth when it's time. 3. Leave the door open for peace. Then I closed the book. Outside, the wind rose, lifting the curtains like breath. The house creaked once, as if agreeing. And in that sound, soft, steady, entirely mine, I heard the quiet I'd been building toward all along.